Good afternoon, and welcome to the House Appropriations Committee second budget workshop. Today we are going to cover sort of budget basics and delve into the budget itself. And so we have Brady Nixon and other folks from the fiscal office here to talk to us and answer your questions. And then we will have a fun activity at the end. We are recording the presentation part, and then as we did the last time, we will go off live for the activity. So we'll have that. Raise your hand for questions at the end of the sections, and we'll go from there. So I'm gonna turn over to Brady.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Enter presentation. Thank you for coming. My name is Brady Nixon. I'm fiscal editor at the fiscal office. So if you notice any typos in any budget bills, you have to yell at. Today we're going to be talking budget bill basics. I think this is working on. I guess Autumn will just ask you to fix the next slide.
Thank you, Chris. You can't put it on.
Yeah, it's connected to her computer. Thank you, Chris Roop. He's an associate fiscal officer at JFO and head clicker. So outline of the talk, today we'll just be doing a quick recap of the month's budget process for those of you that were at our first workshop. Then we'll be going through some definitions of budgetary terms that are oftentimes during the floor reports, and you'll see them in the bill when we're reading it. And then we'll just go through how to read the big bill. Next slide. So first off, recap of the budget process. As my colleague James Duffy mentioned in the first budget workshop, this is a train that the legislature is hopping onto about 3/4 of the way through its journey every year. So this process starts in September to October with agencies and departments developing the budgets for the budget recommendations of the governor. Then the governor's team reviews that, meets with agencies and departments, discusses their budgets, and then finally in January, that budget is then presented to the legislature and given to the House Appropriations Committee. From January to March, the House Appropriations Committee works on their version of the budget and presents it on the House floor. The House votes on it, sends it to the Senate. The Senate does the same, and then if in any crazy situation there are any differences between the Senate bill and the House bill, it's a great conference forum to reconcile those differences and send it to the governor. Next slide. So now we'll just go through some budgetary terms that is going to jog your memory. Next slide.
We love Brady.
So first up, we have that's second. Oh, no. One back. Yep. Great, thank you. So first up, we have appropriation. This is, you'll often hear the term spending authority. This is a specific amount of money that the General Assembly authorizes to be withdrawn from a specific fund for a specific purpose. This can only be done by the General Assembly, so that's where you'll hear that power of the purse term. And the General Assembly can only appropriate directly to a state entity. So if you want to direct funds to a non-state entity, they first have to be appropriated to a state entity. These will appear in the big bill, which is what we often call the budget, as numbers sections, quote unquote, or as one-time appropriations. And you'll see at the top of this slide an example of a one-time appropriation that would always have the specific dollar amount, then the specific fund source, then the word appropriation, and then it would say to what state entity that appropriation is being made. Other appropriations, which you'll hear referred to as base appropriations or numbers sections, look like that example below. So we'll get into the actual mechanics of that a bit later in the presentation, but those numbers sections are what we're talking about when we say base appropriation. Next up, we have allocation. This is the divvying up of spending authority. So it's explicit language that's saying of that money that was appropriated, we want to spend it this way, we want to divvy up to people. So you'll see an example here. This is saying of an appropriation that was made in section B209, 2 million is allocated exclusively for purchasing, outfitting, assignment, and disposal of state police vehicles. So this is sort of drilling down further into that.
So that might have been, say, a $5 million appropriation. And then it says, you know, B and C would be $1 million to this, and then in this case, C is 2.1 million for the purpose. So we can direct it more specifically. We can be as general or as specific as we want in doing this.
The General Assembly or the specific assembly. Next up, we have obligated, and on the flip side of that, you'll hear unobligated. This is encumbrances, and what that means is money that the state has committed to spend after it's been appropriated, either through a grant or contract or some other means for a specific purpose, but that money has not been spent yet. So it's executing after an appropriation is made, a state entity executes an agreement, but that money has not actually gone out the door. So for example, the Agency of Transportation executes a grant agreement with the town of Richford for $1 million. The General Assembly appropriated some larger amount of money to the Agency of Transportation, and then the Agency of Transportation is agreeing to a specific grant amount with the town of Richford. Then we have expended or unexpended funds or expenditures. This is money that the state has actually spent. It's money out the door. So for example, now the Agency of Transportation pays the town of Richford $150,000 for completing part of the grant. They agreed, they obligated to spend $1 million on that grant. Now $150,000 of that is actually going out the door to Richford. Then we have reversions. Reversions send all or part of the prior year appropriations back to the original fund source. So the General Assembly can appropriate an amount of funds and then due to underutilization or other circumstances, revert some of that spending forward back to the original fund source. Funds can also be carried forward from one fiscal year to the other. This is often referred to as carry forward. This just means that an appropriation can be used by an agency or department in a future fiscal year. Yes.
If I could interrupt the question. So appropriated back to original fund for source is like the general fund,
Yes.
not back to AHS
No.
line such and such.
Correct.
Okay.
So we might have given Human Services $10 million or, you know, DEVA or something for a specific program. And at the end of the year, they've spent $8 million and there's $2 million left. And so at closeout, usually the administration looks at things and says, are we going to leave the money in that $2 million and carry it forward so it stays in that budget? Or are we going to revert it back to from whence it came, in this case, the general fund? If it was a global commitment thing, it would have to go back to multiple categories.
Exactly. And so you can kind of think of these as two sides of the same coin. And then just to point out for you, something that you'll see littered throughout the budget bill is this phrase here that says these funds shall carry forward each fiscal year until fully expended or reverted. And that's not always used, but if the General Assembly, you know, theoretically, the intent is that those funds stay with that agency or department, then that can be explicitly laid out.
Or we might say the other side of that, if we really only wanted for 1 year, any monies not used will be reverted to the general fund.
Absolutely.
We
And
can do that too.
in a recent budget, the General Assembly did that with ARPA funds. They made it very explicit, the reversion process for those funds that would have expired if they weren't obligated by the end of a certain calendar year. Next up, we have the transfers. So this is the movement of money from one fund to another. There's a section of the bill that I'll explain later where all those transfers happen. So you can go to the page in the bill and see those. And these are often, if they're not in that section, you'll see $1 million or whatever sum of money is transferred from the general fund to the education fund. So it's just explicitly laying out that movement of money from one fund source to another.
So it isn't going to an agency or department, it's fund specific.
Next up, we have reserves. So this is money that is quote unquote held in a fund that can only be released for appropriation or transfer under specific circumstances that are laid out either in statute, which is enacted law that continues on in perpetuity with its effect, or session law, which is only applicable to the current year. You'll see the term shall be reserved frequently, and then below you'll see a few examples of quote unquote statutory reserves. So we have the 2753 reserve, the stabilization reserve, the general fund, and then the quote unquote rainy day fund, also referred to as the balance reserve.
So I'm wondering if people know what the 2753 reserve is? Yeah.
That's 80%.
Yeah, so the 2753 reserve relates to the 53rd week of Medicaid and the 27th payroll. So in certain years, there is an extra week and we need to account for that extra spend. So that reserve exists for that purpose.
So it's like every 7 or 9 years or whatever it is, we put money in every single year. And if we didn't, we'd have this huge multi-million, tens of millions of dollars of suddenly we have to pay. So we're saving up to pay it off and then we build it up again. So we're always putting money into that.
The year there's 53 pay weeks and 27.
Right, and 27
Payroll.
payrolls, 27 payrolls and 53 Medicare. Medicaid, yeah.
Before we move on to the second part of the presentation, are there any questions? Okay, great. So how do you read the big bill? Now we're going to get into the mechanics of actually reading the budget. I wanted to make clear the budget has a totally different numbering structure from any other bill. But that numbering structure is mostly the same in every single budget bill. There are A, B, C, D, and E sections, and then some years there are other sections that we'll get into later. A sections are annual standard explanatory sections. These appear at the very beginning of the bill, and they include an explanation of the purpose of the bill, definitions of terms used in the bill, and the legend, which is your roadmap to how to read the bill. So if I'm MIA, go to section A108 of the bill, and he'll serve in my stead. This outlines the authority that's being given to the administration in terms of how the administration can interpret what is in the bill as well. And these sections are largely the same year to year. They really don't change. This is what A108 looks like. So again, this is the legend. This explains to you where you can find different things in the bill by function area of government. So that outlines it there, and then it also explains where you can look for the transfers, the reserves, and things like that.
And I'll just mention that we'll post this presentation on our website as well, so you know there's a lot on that.
So then we have the B sections of the bill. This is the numbered sections that I was referring to earlier. These are mostly base appropriations for the coming fiscal year, which is spending authority or appropriations for ongoing expenses. So this covers not one-time expenses or one-off investments. These are the things that we expect to fund for ongoing expenses year to year. Each function area shows where funds are going and where they're coming from. So when I say function area, I mean right next to the section number there. I'm sorry, it's a little small. You'll see section B100, Secretary of Administration, Secretary's Office. That is the function area. That's telling you what part of government this appropriation is for. Then you'll see below that major objects, that personal services, operating expenses, grants. On the other side of that, you'll see how much of the appropriation is going to each of those major objects. Then below you see the fund sources, so it's telling you where the money for that appropriation is coming from. And then on the bottom of both, you'll see a total. So for the money going out, there's a total, and the money going in, there's a total. And if JFO did its job well, then those numbers should be the same. Next, just a brief aside, JFO produces what we call the web report. This is an online resource. Every time the bill is on the floor, you'll also have printouts of that available on the well of the house. This is a resource that matches exactly what's with the numbers sections, and it shows changes at each stage of the bill process. So again, apologies for the small font here, but you'll see this corresponds to that B100. It's the same function area of government. And then it shows what those numbers were on the governor recommend, then the House, then what's the difference between the governor recommend and the House. Same for the Senate, and then same for the Committee of Conference. So this is from the final web report of Act 27, the fiscal year 2026 budget bill, but it shows all that movement and all those decisions.
And it also, at the bottom, my favorite piece is the little description. It says the House did something. In this case, we removed 120,000 and everybody agreed, but sometimes there's a very long section that says, Governor did this, the House did this, the Senate did this, Committee of Conference did that. And but you get a sense of how we ended up where we ended up, because there's that little history of what happened. So that's what that is all part.
Back to the B section. So there are other B sections. These will include one-time appropriations, which is spending authority that's given from revenues that may not recur. So the appropriations committees don't want to build their budget off of money that might not come in the following year, but we might have a pocket of money that the General Assembly can tap into. So this is where the General Assembly will make one-time appropriations with those funds for discrete projects, investment, typically not ongoing expenses. You'll also see sections that deal with contingent transactions. So sometimes the Department of Finance and Management will flag for the General Assembly that anticipated revenues may exceed what the budget was built on, which is that consensus revenue forecast. And the General Assembly may decide to include language specifically laying out what to do with those revenues if they do in fact come in.
So last year, for example, we knew we were going to have extra revenue, but once the tax money came in, by the end, for the Committee of Conference, we had language to reserve money in the event the federal funds not coming through. We had $50 million for the radar board. We used $6.5 million of that for SNAP when the government shutdown happened. The board had some extra meetings around that. And we had another 30 million for more federal funds and another 30 million for a number of other things. It could have been that, or housing or education, property tax relief, et cetera. So we had a good sense of how much money we would have left. And that's where we put the contingencies in. It was in a priority order. So if you only have some of the money, so we had like 118 million, I think. If we'd only had 100 million, we would have used all of number one, all of number two, maybe part of number three or whatever until we got to there.
Yes.
So with respect to the one-time appropriations, are they always at the end? So if AHS has B 318, and that's where I see base appropriations for 318. If there is any one-time associated with that same area, department program, et cetera, is it always going to be at the end, or will it be up to that B 318?
That's a great question. So there are other sections of the bill that actually do line up with the number sections, so I'll get into that a bit later. But the appropriations in that one-time appropriations section don't align with that numbering structure for the base appropriations. They will always appear though as section B 1100 of the bill. So anytime you're looking for where those one-time appropriations are, you can go to section B 1100.
And so it usually starts out B 1100A and B, right? We go through the alphabet. And then if you get to the end of the alphabet, you go to AA, DB, and what did we go to last year? EG or HH or something like that. We had a lot of one-time appropriations, an extraordinarily large number of one-time appropriations. It'll be in your budget book that you'll be looking at shortly.
Personally, I didn't need to go to AA at the end of last session, but.
That's a record show.
All right. Next up, we have C sections of the bill. So these are current year adjustments, appropriations, and amendments. Every year, the General Assembly typically will have a budget adjustment act, which is making changes to the budget that it enacted the prior spring. But things can change after the EAA is enacted. The budget presents the next opportunity to make changes to the current fiscal year. Typically, because these are time-sensitive changes, they're effective on passage. So any current year adjustments will typically be in C sections. There's a lot of and sometimes why that goes on with these rules, so I'll explain a difference at the end of the presentation, but the C sections will always impact the current year. Then there's the D sections. The D sections include transfers, reversions, and reserve allocations for the coming fiscal year. Section D100 will always be the allocation of the property transfer tax. Section D101 will always include fund transfers. Section D102 will always explicitly lay out reversions that are occurring. And section D103 will always include the reserves.
So the section C will be in the budget that you're currently building for FY 27, but it's using the current year monies.
Not necessarily.
So it's,
Yeah.
it would be, I'm trying to think of any.
Because you,
Yes,
so
for-
the EAA is done, gone, but we're adjusting the current.
You're still
year.
adjusting the
Yeah.
current fiscal year.
But the section C, which will be in the budget that we pass,
Right.
you're still adjusting current year monies. So are we adjusting current year monies revenue? In
Yes,
this current, in the next fiscal year's budget, is that correct?
If you think
In my
about
brain,
the budget, we're
you know.
living it, and things are still changing, right, as we go along, so yeah, we're putting a proposal. But still, some things are gonna change until we get to the end of the year.
Okay. Alright, thank you.
and it may not just be changes to money, it could also be a time sensitive policy, a department or agency needs to change a position or create a position in a very time sensitive manner.
Thank you.
And then we have the E sections, which are everything else, for the most part. These are what we refer to as the language sections of the bill. And these correspond to those number sections. So you'll see this example here. There's section B 600, which is the base appropriation for the University of Vermont. And then there's section E 600 that speaks to the University of Vermont and what finance and management should do with that appropriation being made in section B 600. So every E section links back up to a B section. If there's any language relating to a B section of the bill, you can find it by saying it's B 600. I'll look and see if there's an E 600.
Back to the question about one-time funds, would you likely see a descriptor in the E section that kind of marries up base one-time fund, just allocated or?
In some instances, not always. So you may see it referred to, you may see explanatory language for a one-time appropriation in the one-time appropriation section. Or, for instance, there may be a one-time appropriation to the University of Vermont, and then there's a lot of policy change going surrounding that. And so then you may see in an E 600 section saying of the one-time appropriation made in section B 1100, this is what it's about. So if there needed to be extensive language related to a one-time appropriation, it would still be tied to the relevant base appropriation.
So think of the 1100 section is if you can't explain it in like a sentence or two, then there's gonna be more language in the E section to further explain it, because maybe there's a whole lot to be said, but we don't want to use that B section to blather on about whatever it is. No blathery rule.
And just very briefly, then we have section E 100. Section E 100 will always include position changes. So if you're looking for any positions that are being added or switched from limited service to permanent or classified to exempt, all of those changes occur in section E 100. And then we have F, G, H, etc. So as I mentioned earlier, other sections are pulled into the bill and can change year to year. So there's some quick examples from the past few budget bills here. You'll see in Act 78, which was the fiscal year 2024 bill. The F sections touched on workforce and economic development policies. Then in the following fiscal year, Act 113, the F sections touched on financial regulation fees. Act 27, our current budget. The F sections were actually the FY 2025 Budget Adjustment Act. If you may recall, the budget adjustment was eventually folded into the big bill given the timing and the inability for the budget adjustment to be enacted independently.
We never passed a budget adjustment last year, so we had to put all the relevant pieces that we could into the big bill. So it got its own special section, I forgot.
Right, and that's what I had alluded to earlier, just flagging that in Act 27, there were some current year fiscal adjustments made in the C sections, but then there were also many sections in the F section that did impact the current fiscal year, because in this special instance, we had an impact on the BAA. And then finally, the effective date section, which is always last and will always have its own section letter. So you'll see that again changes year to year what section letter it is, but it's always its own discrete section of the bill. So just to wrap up, there is a lot of standard language in the budget that appears year to year and doesn't change from year to year. The A sections explain the bill, the B sections, those numbers sections make appropriations. The C sections affect the current fiscal year. The D sections move money around, and then the E sections contain language relating to corresponding B sections. And then there are other sections which vary year to year, and those can often come from other bills.
And this will be on our website. We'll post that this afternoon, maybe.
Great, and so now we have a little workshop activity. I think we can go up live now.
Now for the